What? We just jumped 600 subscribers over the weekend? That's freaking crazy! Thank you all for supporting our Cursed City painting series, where we paint up the enemies in contrast and the heroes in a traditional paint method. In this video, I'll be painting up the Vargskyr, and I'm going to share with you guys the importance of color temperature.
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible to each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the channel, collectors. Today we will be continuing the series of contrast enemies, where we paint up the enemies of Cursed City using the contrast method. You can check out the other Cursed City miniatures I've painted right here and everywhere else. The link to the playlist will be in the show notes below. With that out of the way, today we're going to be painting up the Vargskyr, and I'm going to share with you guys the importance about using color temperature. I've chose the Vargskyr to talk about this topic because it's a rather large and imposing model, and this gives us a lot of opportunity to showcase how a color temperature gradient can make the miniature look a lot more interesting. So before we begin the project, you're going to need all these colors right here, all these colors for this entire project. So let's get them ready and let's get started very soon. To begin, color temperature is important because it creates a type of contrast. Human vision innately looks out for contrast, and color temperature is one of them. When we speak about contrast in art and miniature painting, usually we look at light and dark, which is value. But very often we forget that color temperature is almost just as important as value and light and dark contrast. In the finished Vargskyr, as what you can see right here, I've deliberately used cooler skin tones to contrast the warmer underglow that I painted on this miniature. I did this because the ambient light serves as a very good wrapping to emphasize on the areas that I want to showcase on the Vargskyr model. So for the first stage, we're going to be using the airbrush. As you have seen in my other videos, I've used the airbrush in a very fixed manner, and if you don't have an airbrush, don't worry, because we'll be recording a video to show you guys how you can achieve a similar effect without the airbrush. So from a black primer, what I'm doing is I'm going over the entire model using a red ink. You can use scale 75 intense red to achieve this effect. Alright? So moving on, we're going to use Games Workshop Evil Sun Scarlet to spray from the bottom. This directional highlighting creates the warm source light from the bottom left of this miniature, and you want to do this in thin layers, and you can achieve this really warm glow from the bottom. Okay, so right now I'm going to be blasting the top right corner with black ink. Scale 75 intense black is just fine. So what I'm trying to create here is I'm trying to create a temperature gradient from warm to neutral like black, and then use white, watercolors white, to create a cool highlight on this model. I'm focusing on the right hand side of the face of this model and the exposed arm. Okay, so this is how it looks. Now that the airbrush stage is complete, we can move on to the actual contrast stage. This stage is really fun, and I like this a lot because it's very gratifying. For the contrast stage, I'll be focusing on tinting the colors of the miniature, and I'll allow the shading process to work in the recesses to achieve all the little details. As many of you asked, I've thinned down my contrast paints 3 parts thinner to 1 part paint. This will create a very dilute paint so that you can gradually create gradients on your miniature. And trust me, you got to use contrast medium for this part because I've tried water myself and it's quite a fail. So for the contrast stage, let's just prepare these colors, alright? And let's get started with the contrast painting part. So using a size 4 synthetic squirrel hair brush, we are currently flooding the entire model with skeleton hot. As I mentioned previously, the skeleton hot is thinned down with 2 drops of thinner and 1 drop of skeleton hot. I find that going with gradual layers over the model can create a very smooth and very convincing blend. I'm really sold on the contrast method because it's really fast and it does all the shading for me so that I can just focus on the layering. I like this method a lot because it really saves a lot of time and the effect is very convincing. So there you have it. So after that, I'm using Valpur's Pink to wash out the really sensitive areas. So I'm doing the ears, the nose, the wing flaps, and the connecting tissue between the membrane of the skin. So as you can see, the paint is really thin and I've done this over several layers to achieve this effect. I'm also doing this on the knees, the joints such as the elbows, and a bit on the fingers too. This is to create a bit of variation on the skin tone to make this model look a little bit more interesting. Okay, so right now I'm gonna be using Grunter fur. I'm using Grunter fur to give some variation to the fur on this Vargskyr. You want to make sure that the fur is not just monochromatic so that you can make this central mass of this miniature look a lot more interesting. I'm fading the fur from a light brown to a red brown and eventually to a black. So right here you can see at the finest tips, I'm gonna be using the contrast paint, Black Templar, to achieve this. Just need a little bit, and as you can see, it creates a very awesome gradient right here. Whoa, honestly, the miniature doesn't look half as bad right now. If you are into just tabletop gaming and you just want a painted miniature, I touch my heart, honestly this looks fine enough as a tabletop gameplay model. But you know we're not going to stop here. You know that I want to push this miniature to a higher quality level. So for the layering stage, let's just get these colors ready. Alright, get these colors ready and we can start layering the miniature and start pushing on some color temperatures. Alright, so if you're ready, let's begin. How can Kolectiv be Kolectiv without overbrushing? So I'm just overbrushing here. What I'm currently using is a little bit of Vallejo model color, pale blue grey mixed in with a little bit of stone grey, and just very lightly overbrushing to pick out some details right here. And this is the result. Okay, so now here I'm going to be using Vallejo model color stone grey mixed in with a little bit of Vallejo model color pale blue grey to pick out some details. Remember I spoke about color temperature? This is where I start to cool down the skin tones to make it really stand out from the rest of the model. Because the model has already been based in red, you really can show the cool skin, and this will only get more obvious as I add in more Vallejo model color pale blue grey to cool down the skin tones. I'm doing this similarly also for the pink areas, just adding in a little bit of Lupus Pink to make sure that the tint still retains a little bit of magenta. Moving on, I'm adding in a little bit more Vallejo model color pale blue grey, and as you can see, this subtle change in color temperature is making the face area pop out and look very extreme compared to the rest of the body. I like how the subtle reds play with this cooler colors, and this really makes the key features such as the face of this Vargskyr stand out. So with subsequent layers, I'm also going to be adding in more and more Vallejo model color pale blue grey, as well as a little bit of pale sand here to really increase the value. Working on the little wrinkles here, just to show the texture of the model. So now that we have pushed up some color temperatures, you can see a rough temperature gradient between the cool side and the warm side of the miniature. What's next? We're going to turn this up a notch and make the color gradient even more extreme. So for the detailing segment, I'll be warming up the highlights in the area that we have airbrushed red, and I'll very slightly cool down the extreme highlights on the Vargskyr flash to make this even more contrasty. So if you're ready, let's begin the final detailing stage on this model. So for the first layer of highlights, I'm going to be using Games Workshop Evil Sun Scarlet to pick out some of the highlights that the airbrush didn't hit. So I'm doing this for the face and the eyes also. But here comes the fun part. I'm going to be using Vallejo Model Color Amaraf Red to really pick on the details and showcase the little forms of the arm that is leading the model. This really showcases how warm the light is, and you just want to do this very selectively, not on all the features. So still on Amaraf Red, I'm currently warming up the claws, the terrain features, and the underside of the fingers. You want to make sure that this is done even more subtly, and you want to pick out the underlying surfaces only. Nothing should be facing forward. Just picking out some of the texture details here, the wrinkles, and very soon we'll call this model done. That was ultra gratifying, and this is the final result of the Vargskyr model. So as you can see, this is how I use color temperature and color gradients to ensure that the key features such as the face and the wings pop, whereas the warmth is used as an envelope to surround these features so that the viewer's attention is drawn to them. So I'm really enjoying painting the Cursed City models, and I hope you guys are enjoying it too. I feel sorry for the painters and collectors who couldn't get their set of Cursed City. But don't worry, I'm pretty sure that Games Workshop will reproduce this because Games Workshop fundamentally just wants to make more money. Why wouldn't you want to make more money? So if you found this video useful, why not give us a like and subscribe, because this really helps out the channel and it keeps me producing more videos like this. And if you really want to directly support the channel, why not head on to the Patreon and get a slew of painting content which I've been painting for the past year or so. Alright, so remember, this is an ongoing series. I'll be painting up a lot more Cursed City models. Let me know in the comments below which other miniature you'd like to see me paint, and I'll see you in the next Cursed City painting video next. See you guys.